The shocking discovery. The room was dark, only lit by the dim glow of computer screens. Mark, an engineer at the city's top research facility, sat alone in front of a terminal. It had been a long day, and he was ready to go home. But there was something odd about the latest project files he had been assigned. His curiosity got the better of him, and instead of shutting down his system, he decided to take a quick look at the data. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he opened a restricted folder. The label read, Project Eternity. Confidential. Mark knew better than to tamper with anything above his clearance level, but something about the title intrigued him. Project Eternity. He whispered to himself, leaning closer. His heart skipped a beat as he noticed a file titled, Warship 9000, the ultimate weapon. There were no descriptions, just a collection of blurry images and technical blueprints. His mind raced. A warship? The document looked old, too old to be something new. Mark wasn't sure what he expected, but what he found was beyond anything his wildest dreams could have imagined. The images were of a ship. It wasn't just any ship, though. It was a massive, sleek warship that looked more like something from a science fiction movie than a real-world military vessel. It had sharp angles, glowing lines across its surface, and enormous engines that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Mark quickly scrolled through the file, trying to absorb as much as he could. The ship was designed for space combat. It had weapons that could disable an entire fleet in minutes, and shields capable of stopping the most powerful blasts from enemy ships. But that was not what stopped him cold. The warship was real. Mark's mind raced as he scanned through the details. The ship wasn't a prototype or a concept. It existed. The file didn't explain where or when it had been built, but the technical specifications were too detailed to be a fake. This warship wasn't just a figment of someone's imagination. It was a marvel of engineering, capable of altering the balance of power on a galactic scale. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. Who could build something like this? And why wasn't anyone talking about it? His eyes flicked to the top of the screen. The document was marked Top Secret. He should close the file and forget about it. This wasn't his business. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. This was too big, too important. He quickly copied the file to his personal drive. It was risky, but he had to know more. As the data transferred, his mind raced through 100 different questions. What was the purpose of the warship? Who owned it? And most importantly, why was it kept hidden from the public? He couldn't just walk away from this. Once the file was saved, Mark decided to do something reckless. He would dig deeper. He started searching through the facility's network for any other information related to the warship. As he worked, a chill ran down his spine. The deeper he went, the more secrets he uncovered. There were reports from military contractors, mentions of classified space missions, and even budget allocations for a project called Eternal Victory. The warship, Mark realized, was part of something much larger. It wasn't just a weapon. It was the key to a massive, covert operation. But what was the goal of this operation? Was it about defense, or was it something more sinister? Mark paused, his finger hovering over the keyboard. He knew he had to stop, but he couldn't. The answers were too close now. He clicked on the next link in the chain, and a new document appeared on the screen. This one was even more classified. It contained images of a vast space station, orbiting a distant planet. There was no name, no description, only coordinates. Mark felt his pulse quicken. His fingers trembled as he copied the new document. What had he just uncovered? A military base in space. And why had it been hidden? The possibilities were endless, but they all pointed to one thing. Something extraordinary was out there. Something that could change everything. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside his office. Mark froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He quickly shut down his computer and slipped the drive into his pocket. Whoever it was could not see him with the data. He sat still, barely breathing, praying that the footsteps would pass. They did, but the fear didn't leave him. Mark was faced with a choice. Should he continue to dig deeper into this mystery, knowing the risks? Or should he walk away and forget he ever saw it? The warship's existence could change everything, if it was real. The problem was, the more Mark uncovered, the less he understood. And the less he understood, the more dangerous this discovery became. As he left the office, the weight of the information in his pocket felt like a ticking bomb. Mark had just uncovered something that no one was meant to see. The question now was, what would he do with it? His eyes were wide with both fear and excitement. The warship was real, and it was just the beginning of something far bigger than anything he could have ever imagined. The warship revealed. The next morning, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep within him. He had spent the entire night reviewing the files on his personal drive, his mind spinning with questions. The warship's existence was no longer just a mystery. It was a reality that had the potential to change everything. But now, the question loomed larger than ever. What should he do with the information he had found? He had no answers, only more questions. The more he read, the more he realized that the warship was just one part of something far bigger. But what was its purpose? And who would want to keep it hidden? As the sun began to rise, Mark made his decision. He couldn't let this secret stay buried. The world needed to know. But the moment he made up his mind, the weight of his decision hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't something he could just tell anyone. If he shared the information with the wrong people, it could destroy him, or worse. With his heart pounding in his chest, Mark sat down at his desk and began to prepare a plan. He would need evidence, something concrete to prove the warship's existence. He couldn't just show a file. He needed something undeniable. It was risky, but he had no choice. The truth had to come out. He knew the first step was to contact someone he trusted, someone who could help him make sense of all the data he had gathered. His old friend Sarah worked as a journalist with connections to powerful people. If anyone could investigate this, it was her. Mark hesitated for a moment before typing a message on his secure phone. Sarah, I need to meet you. I found something that could change everything. It's important. He pressed send and waited. The minutes felt like hours as he anxiously watched the screen. When Sarah finally replied, it was with a simple, urgent message. Where and when? They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Mark couldn't afford to take any chances. He had to make sure no one was following him. He grabbed his things and left the office, taking the long way around to avoid any potential surveillance. Every car, every pedestrian seemed to be watching him. He kept his head down, his mind racing. At the cafe, Mark sat at a corner booth, eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. When Sarah arrived, she gave him a curious look, but he could tell she wasn't aware of the magnitude of what he was about to share. Mark slid the small drive across the table. It's all here, he said quietly. The warship, the secret projects, everything. He watched as Sarah's eyes flicked to the drive, and then back at him, her expression unreadable. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her voice low. I have to be, Mark replied. I don't know what this is, but I know it's real. I need your help to figure out why they're hiding it. Sarah looked at the drive for a long moment before nodding. All right, I'll take a look. But you need to be careful. Whoever is behind this doesn't want anyone knowing what they've been up to. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He knew she was right. He had already put himself at risk just by looking at the files, but now he was dragging someone else into it. He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What would happen once the truth came out? Would the world be ready for it? Or would they just try to bury it even deeper? As Sarah left, Mark watched her disappear into the street. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He quickly stood up, scanning the cafe for any signs of trouble. But the streets outside were quiet. Maybe he was just being paranoid, or maybe it was the calm before the storm. Hours later, Sarah called him back. Her voice was frantic. Mark, you need to listen to me. I've seen what's on that drive. This warship, it's real. But there's more. There's a space station, hidden in orbit around a distant planet. And it's not just a military base. It's something far bigger. Someone has been working on something dangerous. Mark's stomach twisted. He knew it. He had always known that this warship wasn't the only secret. There was something else. Something that would change everything. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We go to the source," Sarah replied. "We find out who's behind this. And we expose them." Mark felt the weight of the decision press down on him. This wasn't just about a warship anymore. It was about uncovering a secret so big that it could shift the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The world wasn't ready for this truth. But it was already too late. The warship had been revealed. And with it, Mark had opened a door that could never be closed. The power behind the warship days passed, but Mark couldn't shake the unease that had taken root in him. The warship was only the beginning. The more he uncovered, the more questions arose. Sarah had been investigating the data for hours, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized how enormous this project truly was. They were no longer dealing with just a weapon. They were uncovering a vast web of secrets and hidden agendas that stretched across space and time. One evening, as Mark sat in his apartment going over the latest documents Sarah had sent him, his phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "You need to see this. It's not just about the warship anymore." He met Sarah in person the next day. They gathered in a quiet, dimly lit room at the cafe, away from any prying eyes. Sarah's face was tense, her expression serious. She slid a tablet across the table, the screen showing a series of images and documents. "This," Sarah said, pointing to the display, "is what we've been looking for." The images were of the warship's power systems, but this wasn't like anything Mark had ever seen before. At first glance, it looked like a complex energy grid, but the more he studied it, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary source of power. The blueprints detailed a form of energy, something that didn't exist in the known universe. Mark's heart began to race. This warship, this supposed tool of war, was powered by something beyond any human understanding. There was talk of harnessing a form of energy that had been thought to be theoretical at best, dark energy. A force so powerful that, if controlled, it could fuel not just a warship but entire fleets, entire star systems. Sarah explained, "According to the documents I found, this isn't just a weapon of mass destruction. It's a key to unlocking something greater. If they can control this energy, they could change the very fabric of reality." Mark's mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what he was hearing. Dark energy, harnessed for war. But it wasn't just for war. It could give its masters the power to manipulate space and time, to create weapons beyond imagination, or even rewrite the laws of physics. The possibilities were terrifying, and if the wrong hands got hold of it, the results could be catastrophic. "The question now," Sarah continued, "is who's behind this? Who could control something like this?" Mark leaned in, staring at the screen. The answer was hidden in the small, subtle details of the data. It wasn't a government project. It wasn't a single corporation. No, this was much larger than that. It pointed to an organization with the resources to build such a ship, and more. The name of the group was only briefly mentioned, and it was as mysterious as the project itself, the Sovereign Collective. "This is bigger than we thought," Mark whispered. The Sovereign Collective was a shadow organization that, until now, had only been whispered about in conspiracy theories. Mark had heard rumors, stories of a group that operated in the background, influencing governments and corporations alike. But until now, he had never believed it. Now, it was clear that this mysterious group had a hand in creating the warship, and with it, the ability to control the very forces of the universe. Mark could feel the weight of what they were uncovering. The Sovereign Collective was not just interested in the warship or the dark energy. They were after something much more dangerous, ultimate power. If they succeeded in harnessing this new energy source, they could reshape the entire galaxy in their image. The idea of such power falling into their hands made Mark's stomach churn. "We have to stop them," Sarah said, breaking the silence. Mark nodded slowly, but the reality of their situation was dawning on him. Stopping the Sovereign Collective would not be easy. In fact, it seemed impossible. This organization had resources beyond anything they could imagine. And the Warship, it was just the beginning. There were likely many more projects like it, each more advanced and dangerous than the last. The power of the Warship wasn't just in its weapons or shields. It was in the technology that powered it, the dark energy that could fuel an entire fleet of ships. If Mark and Sarah didn't act quickly, the Sovereign Collective could build an unstoppable army and change the balance of power across the entire galaxy. They knew they needed to find more information. They needed to learn everything they could about the Sovereign Collective, and quickly. But they weren't alone in this. Others were watching them. Others were hunting for the same information. Every step they took, they were being watched by the collective itself. Mark's thoughts raced. We need to find the space station. The one the files mentioned. It's the key. If we can get there, we can uncover more of their plans. Sarah agreed, but the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on her. If we're right, and this warship is just the beginning, the risks are higher than ever. We're not just up against an army. We're up against an entire network that could be everywhere. Mark stared at the data one last time before closing his laptop. He had crossed a line that he couldn't uncross. The path ahead was full of danger, and there was no turning back. But the warship was out there, and the dark energy was out there, and they were the only ones who could stop it. The warship was just the beginning of something much bigger, and Mark had a feeling that the galaxy would never be the same again. A fight for control. Mark and Sarah knew they were racing against time. Every move they made felt like it could be their last. They had uncovered the terrifying truth about the warship, the Sovereign Collective, and the incredible dark energy that could change everything. But they still didn't know enough. They needed to find more, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden within the space station the files had mentioned. The journey ahead was not going to be easy. They had already revealed themselves by accessing the files, and now there were eyes everywhere, watching their every move. The Sovereign Collective was not a group that allowed its secrets to slip through the cracks. Mark and Sarah were already in too deep to turn back, but with every step, they were exposing themselves to greater dangers. To avoid detection, Mark and Sarah decided they needed to get off the grid. They contacted a few trusted allies who could help them hide their movements. One of those allies was Ivan, a former member of a covert military unit who had worked on several top-secret missions. He was one of the few people Mark trusted enough to involve in this situation. "Meet me at the warehouse on 5th Street, Ivan texted. "I'll have a plan for you." When Mark and Sarah arrived, they found Ivan waiting inside, his face grim. "We've been monitoring the situation. The Sovereign Collective knows you two are poking around. I don't know how, but they do." Mark felt his stomach tighten. What are they planning? Ivan's eyes flicked to the door. They're preparing to move the warship. They'll be sending it to a secure location, the space station. Once it gets there, it's game over. If they can get control of that dark energy, they won't just have a warship. They'll have a weapon unlike anything we've ever seen. Sarah stepped forward. "How do we stop them?" Ivan looked at them seriously. "You can't. Not alone. You're going to need help. I can get you to the space station, but it's not going to be easy. The collective has agents everywhere. They'll be waiting for you. We need to move fast." Mark glanced at Sarah, his heart racing. The reality of what they were about to do was finally hitting him. They were about to confront the most powerful organization in the galaxy, and they were just two people. It felt impossible, but the stakes were too high to back down. "We don't have a choice," Mark said, determination flooding through him. "We have to get to that space station before they do." Ivan nodded. "I've got a ship ready. It's small, low profile. We'll be able to slip past their radar if we move quickly." The three of them set out immediately, knowing that every second counted. The journey to the space station would take them through dangerous territory, areas controlled by the Sovereign Collective's agents. They would have to stay off the grid, using stealth and speed to avoid detection. As they boarded the small, unmarked transport ship Ivan had secured for them, Mark could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The ship's engines hummed to life, and they ascended into the atmosphere, slipping past the city's defenses without a trace. It wasn't long before they encountered their first challenge. The space station was located in a heavily guarded sector of space, and the Sovereign Collective had already set up a perimeter of drones and surveillance ships. Mark could see the radar readings flicker on the control panel, the bright blips indicating enemy ships circling the area. "Stay calm," Ivan instructed. "We'll slip past them. Just follow my lead." The ship swerved and dipped, narrowly avoiding a patrol ship. Mark's pulse quickened as they passed through the blockade, but it wasn't over yet. They had to get close enough to the space station without being detected. The minutes felt like hours. Each time a patrol ship got too close, Mark held his breath. But Ivan's skill as a pilot kept them one step ahead. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the edge of the space station's orbit, hidden in the shadows of a nearby asteroid field. The space station loomed ahead, massive and intimidating. It was more than just a research base or military facility. Mark could feel the power emanating from it. This was the heart of the Sovereign Collective's operation, and it held the key to everything. But just as they were preparing to dock, a sudden warning flashed on the ship's control panel. The Collective had detected their presence. Alarms blared across the ship. "They know we're here," Sarah said, panic creeping into her voice. Ivan didn't hesitate. "Get ready for a fight. We're not leaving without that information." As the ship approached the station, the surrounding area erupted into chaos. Enemy drones swarmed toward them, firing weapons. Ivan steered the ship sharply to avoid the incoming fire, but they couldn't escape entirely. A few hits landed, shaking the ship violently. "We need to land now," Mark shouted. With quick reflexes, Ivan maneuvered the ship into a narrow docking bay, just large enough to fit. They barely managed to avoid crashing into the station's outer walls, but they made it. The ship skidded to a stop, and the three of them quickly grabbed their gear and ran for the station's entrance. As they sprinted through the dark corridors of the space station, Mark's heart pounded in his chest. They had made it this far, but now they were deep inside enemy territory. The Sovereign Collective was waiting for them, and they wouldn't stop until they had everything, especially the warship. The fight for control had begun, and there was no turning back now. The hidden truth. The corridors of the space station were eerily quiet as Mark, Sarah, and Ivan made their way deeper into the heart of the facility. Their footsteps echoed off the cold metal walls, amplifying the tension in the air. They knew they were on borrowed time. The Sovereign Collective would be closing in on them any minute now, and they still didn't know what they were truly up against. Ivan, who had been on countless covert missions, led the way, checking every corner for any sign of surveillance or danger. Mark could feel the weight of the mission pressing on him. They were here to stop the most powerful organization in the galaxy from gaining control of the warship and its dark energy. But even though they had the element of surprise, they were vastly outnumbered. The Sovereign Collective had eyes everywhere, and Mark knew that the moment they found out what the trio was after, they'd throw everything they had at them. "We need to get to the main control room," Ivan whispered. "That's where all the critical systems are located. If we're going to shut this down, that's the place to do it." They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the surveillance cameras whenever possible. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the control room's entrance. Ivan held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. "There's a guard on the inside," he murmured. "We can't just waltz in. We'll need to take him out quietly." Mark nodded, adrenaline rushing through his veins. He wasn't a fighter, but he had learned enough to know that every decision now was crucial. If they were going to stop the Sovereign Collective, they couldn't afford any mistakes. They carefully planned the attack. Ivan would take the guard from behind, using a tranquilizer dart, while Mark and Sarah would stand ready in case things went wrong. It was risky, but it was their best shot. As Ivan approached the door, they heard voices on the other side. He signaled for them to get ready. The plan was simple: knock out the guard, get inside, and access the central control systems. But as Ivan eased the door open, the situation quickly escalated. The guard was already at his post, and he wasn't alone. There were two other figures with him, dressed in dark uniforms. Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a routine guard station. It was something far more dangerous. The figures in the room were part of the Sovereign Collective's elite security detail, trained operatives who were not easy to take down. "We're in trouble," Ivan whispered. "We need to move now." Without thinking, Mark acted on instinct. He pulled out his pistol and moved into the room, firing at one of the guards. The shot rang out, and the guards immediately reached for their weapons. But before they could react, Sarah lunged at one of the operatives, knocking him out with a quick, brutal strike. The remaining guard went for his gun, but Ivan was faster, knocking him out with a well-placed punch. The room fell silent. Mark could hear his own heartbeat in his ears as he tried to steady his breath. They had done it, at least for now, but they knew the fight was far from over. "We need to access the central systems," Ivan said, his voice low. He quickly moved to the control panel, plugging in a portable device he had brought with him. "If we can shut down the station's security, we might stand a chance." Mark stood guard, watching the hallway for any signs of movement. His mind raced. They had barely escaped the last fight, but this was just the beginning. The Sovereign Collective was still out there, and they would stop at nothing to keep control of the warship. As Ivan worked quickly to override the system, Sarah moved to one of the terminals. She began scanning through files, looking for anything that could give them a clearer picture of what the Collective was planning. It didn't take long for her to find something that made her stop in her tracks. "Mark, you need to see this," Sarah said, her voice tight with shock. Mark rushed over to her side. On the screen was a detailed blueprint of the warship, but it was different from the one they had seen before. This one wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon. The blueprint showed a network of interconnected systems that seemed to be powered by the same dark energy they had learned about. But there was something else, something far more disturbing. The warship had been designed not only to destroy fleets, but to manipulate entire star systems. Its weaponry had the potential to destabilize entire planets, creating black holes, tearing apart the very fabric of space itself. Mark's mind reeled. This was beyond anything they could have imagined. "They're planning to use this weapon on an entire sector of the galaxy," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark's stomach twisted. The Sovereign Collective didn't just want power, they wanted to reshape the galaxy itself. And the warship was the key to their plan. If they succeeded in launching it, the entire galaxy could fall under their control. "We have to stop them," Mark said, his voice firm. "We have to destroy this warship before it's too late." Ivan looked up from the control panel, his face grim. "I'm in. The station's security is temporarily disabled, but that won't last long. We need to move quickly." Mark's heart raced as they gathered their things and made their way toward the warship's launch bay. Every second felt like an eternity. They had to get to the warship and disable it before the Sovereign Collective could unleash its unimaginable power. But as they moved deeper into the station, Mark's mind kept returning to one thought. The warship wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of the Sovereign Collective's reach and ambition. And if they couldn't stop it, the galaxy would never be the same again. The final countdown. The corridors grew darker as they made their way through the space station, each footstep feeling heavier than the last. Mark, Sarah, and Ivan knew the stakes were higher than ever. Every corner could hold a trap, Every shadow could conceal an enemy. The Sovereign Collective's agents were closing in, and they were running out of time. The warship was the last piece in the puzzle of the Collective's terrifying plan, and they had to stop it before it was too late. "We're almost there," Ivan whispered, glancing at his watch. "We have maybe 30 minutes before security systems are fully restored. After that, we're sitting ducks." Mark nodded, his heart racing in his chest. 30 minutes. It wasn't much time, but it had to be enough. They reached the launch bay, a massive hangar filled with the hum of energy shields and the sound of machinery in motion. The warship loomed in the center of the bay, its sleek, futuristic design more intimidating in person than any image they had seen. It was an enormous ship, nearly a kilometer long, with weapons and propulsion systems that seemed to pulse with raw power. The dark energy fueling it was visible in the air, like a shimmering aura that seemed to distort reality itself. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice filled with both awe and fear. "We can't let them get this ship off the ground." They moved quickly, ducking behind crates and machinery to avoid detection. The room was filled with Sovereign Collective engineers and military personnel who were working furiously to prepare the warship for launch. It was clear that they were almost ready to deploy the ship and unleash its devastating power on the galaxy. "Over there," Ivan pointed. "The main control terminal is in that room. It'll give us access to everything. Launch codes, weapons systems, the dark energy controls." But the path to the control room wasn't going to be easy. The area was heavily guarded, and it wasn't long before Mark heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The Collective agents were closing in on their position. "Damn it," Mark muttered. "We need to move now." They sprinted toward the control room, ducking behind cover as the guards advanced. Mark's pulse raced as they darted through the shadows, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. They couldn't afford any mistakes. If they failed, the warship would launch, and the Sovereign Collective would be unstoppable. As they neared the door, a guard spotted them. "Intruders," he shouted, reaching for his weapon. Before he could react, Ivan was on him, using his training to disable the guard with a swift, silent strike. The door slid open, and they rushed into the control room. The tension in the air was thick, and Mark could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him. Inside the control room, a series of terminals lined the walls. At the center of the room was a large console, its screens filled with data streams and complex security protocols. The warship's systems were ready to go, and they had to act fast. "Give me a minute," Ivan said, moving quickly to the console. "I need to bypass the security protocols." Mark stood guard, watching the door for any signs of danger. The seconds felt like hours. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he focused on the task at hand. They were so close. They could stop the warship, but only if they could disable the launch systems before the Collective noticed what was happening. Finally, Ivan spoke, his voice calm despite the situation. "I've got it. I've overridden the launch systems and shut down the main weapons array. But there's still one problem." Mark turned to him. "What's the problem?" "The dark energy core," Ivan said, his face grim. "It's integrated into the warship's systems. If we don't disable it, the ship will still have enough power to tear apart entire fleets. We'll need to physically destroy the core." Mark's stomach twisted. "Where is it?" Ivan pointed to the far side of the bay. "The core is in a separate room, near the ship's central reactor. We'll have to go in and manually shut it down. But we don't have much time." A loud alarm suddenly blared throughout the station. They had been discovered. "They know we're here," Sarah said, her voice tight. "We need to move now." Mark nodded. There was no time for hesitation. They had to destroy the dark energy core before the warship could be activated. The countdown had already begun. They raced out of the control room, heading toward the reactor room. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them. The Sovereign Collective was closing in fast. Mark could hear their shouts, their weapons ready. "We're almost there," Ivan called, his voice sharp with urgency. But as they reached the reactor room's entrance, they found it sealed shut, locked down to prevent any unauthorized access. Mark's heart sank. "We don't have time for this," he muttered, reaching for his own tools. Ivan was already at work, trying to hack into the security system to open the door. The alarm grew louder, and Mark could hear the guards closing in from both sides. "Come on, Ivan," Sarah urged. "We don't have much time." With a final twist, the door slid open. Inside, the dark energy core was glowing with an otherworldly intensity, surrounded by powerful containment fields that hummed with energy. It was far more massive than they had anticipated. Its sheer power was almost palpable. "We have to destroy it," Mark said, his voice filled with determination. Ivan quickly set to work, trying to disable the core's containment system. But just as he was about to access the final command, the door behind them exploded open. Sovereign Collective soldiers stormed into the room, weapons raised. Mark felt his heart pound in his chest as the soldiers aimed their guns at them. They were trapped. "Do you really think you can stop us?" a voice sneered from the doorway. The leader of the Sovereign Collective stood at the entrance, his cold eyes fixed on Mark and Sarah. "You're too late. The warship will launch, and with it, the power to reshape the galaxy. You've already lost." Mark's mind raced. They couldn't let the warship launch. Not now. Not ever. In a desperate move, Mark lunged for the control panel, his hands shaking with adrenaline. "We'll see about that." The ultimate decision. The room was filled with tension as the Sovereign Collective soldiers advanced, their weapons aimed squarely at Mark, Sarah, and Ivan. The leader of the collective stood in the doorway, his cold eyes fixed on them, his lips curling into a smug smile. "You're too late," he said again, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This warship will launch, and with it, the power to change the galaxy forever. You can't stop what's already set in motion." Mark's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. The dark energy core hummed ominously in front of them, the source of the warship's unimaginable power. They were on the verge of losing everything. If the collective got control of it, they could reshape the galaxy in their image. Entire star systems would be at their mercy. Mark couldn't let that happen. He looked around the room, his thoughts racing. The door was blocked. There was no easy way out. Their only hope lay in the dark energy core. If they could destroy it, they could stop the warship from ever launching. But the task was monumental. If they failed, the core could tear apart the entire station, and they would all be dead. Mark's fingers hovered over the control panel, sweat beading on his forehead. He glanced at Ivan and Sarah. They were both ready, but the question that lingered in Mark's mind was whether they were willing to sacrifice everything to stop the collective. "Do you really think you can win?" the collective leader said, a mocking laugh escaping his lips. "You're outmatched. You're outnumbered. This is bigger than you." Mark's grip tightened on the console. He had no choice. He couldn't let the warship launch. He couldn't let the Sovereign Collective take control of the galaxy. He looked at Sarah and Ivan, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. "If we destroy the core, the whole station will implode. We won't make it out. But we'll stop them. We'll stop all of this." Ivan met Mark's gaze, his face set with determination. "It's the only way." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with the same resolve. "We can't let them win." Mark took a deep breath, his fingers finally pressing the button to disable the dark energy core's containment system. The room shook as the core began to destabilize. The energy pulsed with a dangerous intensity, the force of it beginning to warp the air around them. "Stop them," the collective leader shouted, but it was too late. The core exploded with a blinding flash of light. The entire room trembled as the station's systems began to fail. Alarms blared, signaling that the self-destruct sequence had been activated. The walls trembled as the dark energy unleashed its full force, destabilizing the entire station. Mark's heart raced as he turned to Sarah and Ivan. "We need to get out. Now." They sprinted toward the nearest exit, the station collapsing behind them. The corridors were in chaos as the collective soldiers scrambled to escape, but it was clear that there was no hope for the station. The warship, with its dark energy power, was now nothing more than a deadly wreck. The sovereign collective's dream of domination was over. But the danger wasn't over yet. As they ran, the station's self-destruct countdown echoed through the halls. They had seconds to escape. Mark glanced over his shoulder, his heart heavy. They had stopped the warship, but at a terrible cost. The station was falling apart, and they didn't have much time to make it out alive. Almost there, Ivan shouted, urging them forward. With a final burst of adrenaline, they reached the hangar, where Ivan's small ship was docked. The ship's engines roared to life as they climbed aboard. Mark looked out the window as the station's collapse reached its peak. The warship, once a symbol of the sovereign collective's terrifying power, was now a burning wreck floating in space. The station itself began to disintegrate, its debris scattering through the void. Mark felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sorrow. The fight was over. They had won. But they had lost so much in the process. As they flew away from the wreckage, the stars stretched out before them, vast and endless. Mark couldn't help but think about the future. The sovereign collective had been stopped, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. New threats would rise, and new battles would be fought. But for now, they were safe. For now, the warship was nothing more than a fading memory. "Do you think we've won?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice filled with both exhaustion and hope. Mark looked out at the vastness of space, the silence stretching around them. "We've won this battle," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "But the war is far from over." As the ship sped away from the wreckage, Mark knew that their journey wasn't over. They had stopped the sovereign collective, but there were still challenges ahead. The galaxy was vast, and the fight for control was always ongoing. But they had proven something. Humanity's resilience, its ability to fight against the odds, would never be broken. And as long as people like Mark, Sarah, and Ivan were around, they would continue to fight.